So this week I decided it would be fun to kind of ask Dad a question and get his opinion on some stuff, since I have a hard time getting him in front of the camera sometimes. So I sent him a text because you guys know in Western North Carolina it has been really cold, it's been snowy, and there was just a day I just didn't want to get out. Stayed at home all day, and I sent him a text that basically said this: if you had to start over today, you didn't have a single piece of equipment in this shop, if you were going to work on cars and kind of do the work that he has done over the past 20 years, 21 years full time, and then over the past 50 years off and on, what would be the top 5 pieces of equipment, tools that you would want to buy? And he responded, "You mean like I did whenever I had to start full time 21 years ago?" And I kind of remembered at that point, I have told you guys the story of Shift Points, the YouTube channel, but I've never told you guys the story of Freeman Hot Rod Repair and why Dad started this shop full time in 2004. So over this video, we're going to hear that story, kind of why we're here, what happened with that, and go over his top 5 pieces of equipment that he would buy if he had to start over again. Coming in at number 5 is a saw, a bandsaw of some kind.
We're starting with this assembly of tools, and everybody's got their own opinion about this stuff, but this is kind of the way I got into this a little bit different than a lot of people. The rug was pulled out from under us, and we had to come in here pretty quick. I had some stuff, but what we were talking about was just trying to make a list of stuff that you could just start with, kind of from scratch. There's certain things that you kind of take into consideration. That you've got some kind of small air compressor, and of course hand tools and drills and hand drills and stuff like that. This saw was for us a very good addition. I mean, you can say, yeah, you can cut it with a sawzall, or you can take a hacksaw and do it if you have to. But we got into some jobs early that we needed multiple cuts on tubing, and this thing was invaluable. It just about paid for itself for that first job. So this is a horizontal bandsaw. This saw will convert from a horizontal, which is, it's about as broad as this long, but you can convert this from a horizontal to a vertical. Now it's a makeshift vertical with a little plate that will bolt on right here, and you can use that as a vertical, but it's a small plate, so it's pretty limited on what you can do as far as in the vertical position, but you can use it as a vertical saw if you have to. And to be fair with you, I don't know, it's been so long since I've used it like that. I don't know where the plate's at, but it's a plate that bolts on in this area right here, and you can use it as a vertical bandsaw. But that would be number 5.
Now I'm going to kind of show you guys a few upgrades that he's done taken over the years. So that one, like he said, is this horizontal bandsaw. We've used it for a lot of stuff. We use it to saw tubing all the time. But we also have this vertical bandsaw that is basically our go-to on a lot of stuff now, just here in the shop. We use it, especially working on the 55 and stuff. It's basically constantly being used. You can just, have a piece of metal that you need, just take it over here, cut out what you need, mark it real quick, get it cut out. It's really easy to use. So that's the reason the horizontal bandsaw is number 5, because you can use it horizontally or vertically. But if you're looking to do an upgrade, once you can move on, this vertical bandsaw is a great next step. So when I say that Dad was kind of forced into this deal, and he has done this before, starting out somewhat from scratch, in the middle of the year 2003, him and my mom were both working at a plant here in town in Mars Hill called Microswitch. That plant, they built microswitches. It wasn't just a clever name. But anyway, Dad was in the maintenance department and worked on the equipment there. Mom worked on the assembly line there, and they had both been there for 25 or more years. 25 plus for both of them. Mom, I think, was a little more than 25. Dad was just under 25. And they came in the middle of the year 2003 and announced that plant would be closing in 2004, basically. So basically a year. And at that point, they had to make the decision on kind of what they were going to do. And at that point, Dad realized that he had been doing a lot of this stuff kind of on the side, and this was a good opportunity for him to go ahead and go full-time here in the shop. And so that's where a lot of this, when I asked him about this list, he said, well, I've done this before, basically, and this is kind of what some of the things I already had that I think is an absolute necessity, and there's some other things that I bought and kind of upgraded as I went along. So as you can imagine, Mom and Dad both losing their jobs at the same time, it was a stressful situation for them. I would have only been, in 2003, I would have been about 9 years old. And to be fair, looking back on it, I didn't even really realize what was going on. I don't think at 9 years old you could realize or understand the pressure that was with that. At least I hope you couldn't, because I sure didn't. and so I didn't understand what was going on, but they had a lot of stuff going on, and he and Mom went together on all this, figured out all this stuff, figured out what equipment they needed, figured out how to acquire it, get it used, go to different auctions or whatever they needed to do to get what they needed. And then at that point, you basically had a set of equipment that was built and ready to go, or that you had ready to go. And then over the years now, and now that I've gotten involved in it too a lot more, we've started to slowly, progressively upgrade some of this stuff. Number 4, a hydraulic press.
On this list would be a hydraulic press. It's pretty valuable if you're going to fix a rear end and any kind of bearing presses and removals. You about have to have one of these. Comes in handy for a lot of things, but this is not a common usage for one of these things, and I didn't use it immediately, but we've de-arched a lot of leaf springs. When we started out, I used an H-beam that we got out a bit more iron. My dad would hold the leaf springs across that H-beam, and I hit them with a hammer. And the only other person I could talk into doing that was Luther Sawyer. He was just a real good friend of ours, but them was the only 2 people I could talk into doing that. But we did several like that, and one day he wasn't available to hold the leaf springs, so I decided I'd try to just, you can lay these plates this way, and I learned the hard way that you need to put a piece of tape on those because they will spit out at times, and you mice your toes. But you can put a leaf spring across these 2 heavy plates and push them down, and you can de-arch them or you can arch them. You can put arch in the springs. So I used it for no telling how many springs we bent on this thing. We got some people, some friends of mine started taking the springs off, which I liked. I didn't have to remove the springs and put them back on the vehicle, but they would bring me the springs, tell me how much they wanted to lower the back of the truck. Most of the time it was a truck. I have done it for a couple of cars, but most of the time it was on a pickup truck. They'd tell me how much they wanted took out of the springs. Most of the time it was a de-arch deal, and I could de-arch them to the point where they could just put them back on. 1-to-1, if you make the spring, if you took 3 inches out of the arch of the spring, it lowered the back of the truck 3 inches. So we've got lots of work doing that. So that's I don't think that's a common thing. A lot of people don't do that, but we ended up figuring that out. So.
Much like the horizontal versus vertical bandsaw, we've also, over the years, have made some upgrades. This is probably one of our most recent upgrades, as we went from that 20-ton press in there to this big 50-ton. I think we haven't even used this on the channel yet. It's probably the first time, unless you saw the short that I did about it, it's probably the first time you guys have seen this one. But the upgrade on this is pretty cool. It's got a 2-travel ram, 2 different travels. So on this one, you can make your big low pressure movements. Then if you swap over to this one here, you can make more fine high pressure movements here with that ram using this side. And the biggest thing is all the different odd jobs that we kind of get into sometimes. This head moves back and forth and allows you a lot more access to do different stuff here. Plus it's 2.5 times more pressing force than the old one that we had. Whenever they opened the shop, one of the big first projects that Dad worked on was Brian Ramsey's 1955 Cameo truck. You guys have seen that truck in our Power Tour video from 2023. I'll tag it here so that you can check it out. Dad did a lot of work on that truck, most of the fabrication and getting the front end in the truck, getting the truck sitting how it is. If you watch that video, you'll actually see that they made modifications to parts on the front end of that truck to get it setting low enough, because Brian and him both wanted the truck lower than what the factory pieces were in that. So definitely check that video out, because it's an interesting truck, and it's honestly, no matter what Brian says, it's still one of the nicest trucks in the whole dang country. So when he did that, that was kind of the first big project that he restoration or resto mod, I guess, is really what that truck is a resto mod. The outside is really sleek and clean, and the interior's got all the creature comforts, radio, air conditioning, all the stuff. And so Dad did a lot of work in building that truck, and that was kind of the first thing that came into the shop at that point. Number 3 on our list, a drill press.
Number 3 on the list was this is a drill press, and we're, like I say, we said before, we're assuming that you've already got hand drills, but a hand drill is, well, at least for me, it's the most inaccurate way of putting a hole in a piece of metal. It's real hard to make a bolt pattern accurate. The drill press is a step up from just a hand drill, so it's a big help. Decent drill press is not terribly expensive this day and time, so I think it's pretty much in the reach of anybody that's starting a shop like this. That's a big addition, a big help.
So basically, a drill press for me is really important, because this was kind of one of the first things that Dad would kind of let me use. Even now, it's still just, it's so easy to mark out a pattern, and I catch myself just using it all the time. Mark out a pattern real quick, bring it in here, put it in the drill press, and you've got really good accurate pattern marked out. It's just hard to beat it. The biggest upgrade to a drill press, of course, is that guy right there, a mill. Now, we thought long and hard about including the mill in this list, and we decided that a drill press, if you're just starting out, of course, is going to be way more affordable, and you can kind of pick one up at Harbor Freight or whatever. But basically, we would say as quickly as possible, if you can, get upgraded to a mill, because you could use a mill kind of like a drill press, if you will, but you can just do so much with a mill that you just can't with the drill press, right? You can put vices, you can clamp stuff, you can do really intricate things, you can hold extremely tight tolerances. So it's really important to get to a mill, but since we said that this was what we were kind of starting out with, go with the drill press, and as soon as you can afford it, pick you up a small used mill. You can always pick this stuff up. There's auctions and stuff almost constantly that you can find, people that are going out of business or people that are retiring and don't need it anymore, is you can find pretty good deals on some smaller mills like this one. Well, you can pick up some that are smaller than this one or one this size for a reasonable number. He was kind of thrown to the fire in that way, that he had to basically figure out what he needed. He had to figure it out pretty quick. He had a welder, he had a press, he had a drill press, he had things like this, but he bought a mill and a lathe and stuff like that. That really made his job a lot easier, and he realized really quickly, even though he knew it at that point already, but he realized really quickly that all this stuff that supposedly bolts on very rarely actually just bolts on. Now, I think there's stuff out there nowadays that's a lot better than it used to be, but still, you see it a lot. We make the joke constantly. If it comes in a box, you're going to have to fix it. And that's because we still run into it today. You pull something brand new out of the box, it just does not bolt up. It doesn't fit like it's supposed to, or oh, well, you should have had this because it's that, or, well, that truck was built in June, and you bought one that was for a truck built in July if you're working on Fords. So, like, there's all kinds of goofy stuff that you run into, so you can either spend your time constantly looking for parts, sending stuff back, dealing with that, staying on the phone, or you have the right equipment and then you make it work, or especially if it's not going to decrease the function. If you can drill a hole out, or if it's just a hole that needs to be drilled out in a piece, you throw it in the lathe and drill it out. So there's a lot of stuff here, and there was a lot of thought put into this list. Number 2, a little bit pricier item, but a really essential deal, a lathe.
Number 2 on this is the lathe. Like I say, a lot of people's going to say that some of the stuff that I came up with is not necessary, but that is an invaluable piece of equipment. When you're really getting into start doing the hot rod stuff, there's so much stuff now that when you get it out of the box, it will have to be modified, changed, reduce the diameter, enlarge the internal diameter. There's all kinds of stuff that you can do with a lathe. Use it a lot for cutting stuff off. You make real accurate cuts. If you need a real accurate length, you can cut those lengths on any kind of tubing or round stock, or you can make a step. It's just invaluable to me if you're going to do any kind of serious hot rod work. That's a pretty valuable piece. He was talking to me a minute ago about me letting him use the drill press. When he graduated off the drill press, I put him on the mill and lathe, and that was kind of the next step. A good friend of mine's good friend, and we got to be friends, came in here one time. He's well recognized in this kind of circles as being a real high-end street rod, race car, hot rod builder. And he walked in here, and he started looking around, and we talked, and I knew him some, but this first time he'd been in the shop. And he noticed, and he said, "I see you've got a mill and a lathe." He said, "I don't see how anybody can do this kind of stuff without a mill and a lathe." And he's right. I've done a lot of work on cars before. I had a mill and a lathe. I had access to a mill and lathe, but I never had them in the shop. But I got to the point where I lost my access to the mill and lathe that I was using. And you really realize at that time how much you need them, how much you miss them if you don't have them. So both of those are pretty valuable pieces of equipment, and a lot of people are in agreement with that does this stuff a lot.
So like Dad said, when I graduated off the drill press, lathe was kind of the next thing that I got a hold of, and honestly, I wish I used them more, and maybe eventually I get to the point where I can. I've probably lost my comfort with it just a little bit, because a mill and a lathe is something you really need to use regularly to stay in practice, just like anything with this stuff. But I feel like they can be so precise that you gotta really think about what you're doing and how you're working with them, or you'll mess something up. But I know that, again, this kind of goes back to, we thought really long and hard about including this one as well, but we just see it. This is a 1440 lathe, but Dad before this had a smaller lathe than this. It was a 1236 lathe, so it was significantly smaller. Now both of these lathes, that one and this one right here, were both bought used. So don't just go and buy something brand new. So that's what I'm saying, is I realize that there's a lot of cost associated with this stuff, but you have to think about it kind of as an investment. It's going to save you so much time in the long run. And this is another one of those that we just all the time, we'll be working on something and Dad will say, "Hey, turn the lathe on," because he's got to turn something down real quick. He needs to do something really quick. But it just makes little things so much faster. And that's why we decided, even if it's a small lathe, even if it's a tabletop size lathe, you need it, and it's going to make things so much easier on you in the long run. One thing that we did this past year was we upgraded our power tools to Milwaukee stuff. I hate to be like a fanboy for tools. I try really hard not to be. I just try to use what makes sense. But man, we've just had such good luck out of that Milwaukee stuff. The batteries are so powerful. They last so long. Just the tools themselves have really helped us out a lot. Just even from a basic light, just really easy to throw under there and use a lot, or up to the drills that we use constantly. And then now we picked up a new rivet tool just recently. So like, it's that those power tools have really. And we talked about it. It was a little bit of a pricey entry point because we were having to start from scratch. But you can run sales and stuff like that to pick up the impact and the drill, and then at that point you've got batteries, and then you just have to buy tools, basically just the bare tool themselves. So there's ways to do it. I know Home Depot, Northern Tool are always running deals on those Milwaukee stuff. So if you're looking for power tools, especially the Milwaukees, check out those places. So you just when you're doing this, you have to basically start somewhere, pick something, and then just start progressively, slowly building up to it. It's just the best way to do it, and really the only way to do it. If you buy a piece and then later on you get a better one, sell that one and kind of put it toward the new one that you purchased, or whatever that looks like. So we realized that some of the things that were on this list were a little pricier, especially the lathe, But like I said, they make, and being at PRI last year, I saw a lot of really neat stuff kind of on a benchtop setup. There's a lot of really cool stuff that's out there that's reasonably priced that you can do a lot with. So, I mean, I think we saw Chris Wozniak from Off Racing. Me and him were talking to a guy who basically had a CNC mill that was roughly 4 feet by 4 feet, and he was telling us all that it could do, and I think they had it listed for like $7,000. And it's like, no, you're not going to machine every piece or everything in the world with that, but it can really do a lot of the relatively smaller stuff that you need to do. I mean, you think about a 4 foot by 4 foot area there that can do CNC work onto, that can do you a lot of good for a reasonable price. So I don't remember what the brand of that was, but that stuff exists, and the prices have really come down into a much better place.
I'm pretty confident when this video goes out, if people watch it, they'll say something to the effect that you don't have to have all this stuff to work on an old car or do metal work or whatever. But I'll agree with you. If you've got talents like my dad had. My dad walked in this shop after I'd worked in here full time she was up here about every day. After we'd worked in here probably 4 or 5 years, and I'd gathered up some of this stuff that we hadn't had before. And he said, "Boy, if I'd have had equipment like this, I could have really done a lot." He did welding, a lot of mostly farm equipment welding. But I told him, I said, if everybody had your talents, because he could do more with a hacksaw and a file than most people can do with a mill and lathe. And I got some examples here that I've still got. He made probably 30 years ago a harmonic balancer puller and a slide hammer to remove axles, basically remove axles out of the back of a 9-inch Ford rear end. Like I say, he made these, pretty much cut all of these holes and the outside profile of this with a torch, ground it a little bit, welded the slide part and the hammer onto the end of this thing. He did all that by hand. He did this by hand, bolt clearance and the notches, and welded the nut to the hub, and he did all that by hand. He didn't have a mill, he didn't have a lathe, he didn't have anything, but he had a torch and a hacksaw and a file, and he did stuff like that. So it's very possible to do all kinds of stuff with very simple basic hand tools if you have to, which is what he thought he had to do, because he didn't want to spend the money to buy this equipment. So, which is probably pretty smart, to be fair. If you're talented like that, I agree with you, you can, but this stuff just makes things a lot easier.
And of course, I'm pretty sure anybody that knows Dad and knows us probably knew what was going to be our number one with his years of experience, but number one, and most importantly, a welder.
Number one on this list, and part of that was because I welded for years. One of the first things I bought in the shop was a welder. It was on Airco TIG welder. Didn't have any high frequency. It did weld AC. You could weld aluminum, but it was a little tedious. But anyway, to do what we're talking about here, a welder would be a absolute necessary thing to have. About anything you're going to work on as far as metal, of course, you're going to have to, at some point, you're going to have to weld it, modify it, change it. But a welder's pretty much a necessity. This one's an upgrade from that old first welder. Another addition that I bought later was a MIG welder, which really speeded up production style mild steel, and I've welded some stainless steel with that MIG welder. It makes it a lot faster, but if you can only have one, and to start up with, you get a TIG, you can weld anything. You can weld aluminum, stainless, mild steel, multitude of different styles of materials. So if you can only have one welder, and you can find those now, the price of those have come way down as far as TIG welders are concerned. So that would be, a TIG welder would be a necessity.
And this welder in particular is a Miller Dynasty 200, and where Dad got this is it actually was like an houred out unit from a NASCAR team down in Charlotte. So they would hour those out after a certain amount of time. They would send them back to Miller. Miller would refurbish them and then resell them. So that's how we ended up with this. Is an houred out welder from a NASCAR team that we picked up refurbished. So basically, if you look at this, a lot of the pieces here in this shop over the past, especially the past 20 years or so, a lot of these are used pieces. Even our new press that we have there, we bought that from a family member that was selling his shop. This was a refurbished piece. The mill and lathe, all of that stuff was new, or it was bought used. And so don't be afraid to go and find something that's good. You don't have to be brand new to be good, is what I'm saying. So some of the stuff, especially like the old mills and stuff, some of those are really great, and they can be older and maybe be a lot less. So don't feel like you have to go out and buy the top of the line thing straight off the production line. You can find a lot of this stuff even now used, so you get your good start on. So while we know that all of this stuff isn't 100%, I wouldn't say everyone's going to agree that this stuff is what you need, but this is kind of how we see it, and the stuff that we use all the time. I mean, almost every day we use one of those 5 pieces of equipment. So let us know in the comments what you think. If you have a top 5 list, if there was 5 tools that you absolutely had to have when you were starting to shop or when you were starting to work on cars. Like I said, we're taking into account that basically your basic hand tools, wrenches, ratchets, sockets, extensions, things like that are absolutely necessary. And we're just basically assuming you've already got something like that, because if you don't have that, you can't get started with anything. But these are kind of your bigger pieces of equipment, is how we look at it. So we hope you guys enjoy this. Hope you learned something from Dad. I got him in front of the camera a little bit more. I'm going to try and get him out of his shell more and more, the best that I can. And we'll continue to do some one-offs like this, kind of tapping into his knowledge as we go forward, I hope. So if you liked it, hit the subscribe button, follow us on Instagram and Facebook, and we'll see you next week.